right, Anita, how's it going today?
Pretty good. How are you?
Yeah, doing good. I'm excited about today's episode. In the last episode, we talked about what needs to take place in childhood. And in this episode today, we're talking about what is actually taking place and kind of how it's impacting the brains and the lives of teens and adolescents. And so, yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah, can't wait.
Some stats that caught my attention really quickly. Jonathan Haidt in the book, The Anxious Generation, which we're continuing to do a book study of, talks about how ages 13 to 18, that they are reporting that they're spending between 6 and 8 hours a day in leisure activity. So that's not even talking about the time that they're doing homework and, at school using their Chromebooks and all those kinds of things. They're saying we're spending 6 to 8 hours in leisure time a day. And some of the Pew Research shows that maybe that's even an underestimate.
Yeah.
It's showing that when they rephrase that question, that 1/3 of the kids say that they're almost constantly on social media platforms. And if they combine the internet plus the social media platforms, they're saying 45% are saying they're almost constantly on. So that's 45% self-reporting that they're almost constantly on either using the internet or social media.
And I feel like that is really an underestimate because I've asked kids, hey, can you check your screen time real quick? And they'll check their screen time and they're surprised at how many hours they've been on and they don't realize.
Right. You know what? I'm really glad you mentioned that.
Yeah.
My spouse and I do that, just kind of check every once in a while, see, okay,
Yeah.
how much time? I said money, but anyway, time is money, right?
Yeah.
How much time was spent, and look at that little, check that Apple gives you or whatever phone you're using, to see how much you actually were on.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's get into the 4 foundations of harms that Jonathan Haidt talks about. He talks about the social deprivation of, teens not being face to face.
Yeah. So deprivation. Yeah.
Yeah.
The social deprivation for sure. That was the number one harm. And so how's that impacting?
It's impacting a lot in a way. We talked about opportunities in the previous chapters. And when you think about it, if you're on social media, then you're missing out on opportunities.
Right.
And especially for teens, I was thinking about when he talks about earlier in the book about the myelin shaft growing and the teens and why it's so important especially for our teens, boys and girls, in that critical age, because those are the memories that that's going to resonate with them once they get older. So, and then missing those opportunities, I feel like is a big thing.
Yeah, just, and I don't think parents realize this. I don't think kids realize this, adolescents realize this, but I'll use the word dopamine. The dopamine so the positive hormones, those kinds of things that they receive from social media interactions, they do get dopamine hits, right? But they don't have a lasting or sustaining. It happens and then it depletes. It happens and then it depletes. But yet when you're with people one-on-one and they're smiling, you're laughing, there's a completely different biological thing that happens in our bodies and our brains. And when you leave a great interaction with a friend, like when I leave a great interaction with you and we've been having fun and creative and talking and laughing, it's sustained. That dopamine hit, that positivity, that energy that I get from that relation, is sustained. It lasts longer. But yet with social media and internet, those kinds of things, they get that dopamine hit, but then it's depleted.
Yeah. And then I was also thinking about social cues.
Right.
Yeah,
definitely.
They're missing out on learning social cues too. And then they don't understand friendship.
Right.
So later on in life, I was seeing somewhere where 45% of women don't have a best friend.
Wow. Okay.
And I was like, that is pretty high.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I thought for grown folks, I'm like, how could they not, right? But it said 45% of women don't have a best friend
Yeah.
later on in life.
This, that's alarming, right?
Yeah, I thought that was a high number.
Which
actually.
leads us to talk about, some of the fallout of the social deprivation is loneliness,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And how that loneliness is impacting our kids and adults as well, right?
Yeah. Well, and it leads to depression. I mean, sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
You were talking about social cues, and so UCLA did a study, and I think it was in 2014, I believe. I could be wrong about that, but they showed that when adolescents go to camp for just 5 days,
Yeah.
this particular one was a nature camp, but when they go to camp for just 5 days, after that time, their ability to pick up on social cues
Mm-hmm.
is immediately increased.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that kind of blew me away. Just 5 days away from technology, and all of a sudden they're they have better emotional intelligence.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. It goes back to the previous chapters that we've talked about, just even them having to navigate, even if they're at camp, they're navigating who they want to meet, so now they're using this up here instead of just trying to be someone that they're not.
Yeah. And what's socially acceptable in a group,
Yeah.
So yeah, very important.
Yeah. So let's talk about the second foundation, and that is sleep deprivation.
Mm-hmm. This one is really big to me. Okay.
Talk about it. Y'all let you talk about it. Go ahead.
One reason it's really big to me is I am one of these people who needs 8 hours of sleep, unlike Anita here. But yeah, I need 8 hours. But I was reminded when I was watching reading this particular chapter, is I can remember when my son was little, and oh my gosh, like this kid, we called him Smiley, was his nickname, because he was always in a good mood, always had a smile on. But I could tell if he didn't get those basic needs of sleep and food, we kept him on a pretty tight schedule, because if he didn't get those, especially the sleep, then that smiley went away, And so we need that structure and we need that sleep. Sleep is so important.
Well, those are the foundations, really. I mean, sleep, eating healthy, self-care.
Right.
So, yeah.
And what we find is that when people are not getting the right amount of sleep, the amount of sleep that they need, that there's increased depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation. They just have less coping skills, right? It just makes sense. And so how is this generation's digital usage impacting their sleep?
These kids are tired and unmotivated. So we're seeing an increase in anxiety and depression and suicide ideation. But yeah, it's, so they're scrolling on their phones past midnight, not sleeping well, probably not eating well. I have this neighbor that was saying, I try to get my kid to come and eat, at dinner, but he's on a game, so I can't disturb him.
Right.
And then he misses meal, and by the time you know it, he's missed dinner. And then he's just getting a snack of whatever. And, so it makes it, they're tired and they're not eating healthy.
Well, and I'm glad that you mentioned that about scrolling, because a big piece of it is about nighttime routines. And so, I mean, if you have your phone in your room and you're having just even the slightest little bit of trouble going to sleep, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to reach for it, right? And then that leads to 2 hours have gone and I'm still not asleep. It also can put you in contact with some negative content that can get you exasperated or frustrated or hurt your feelings or all those kinds of things.
Oh, yeah, because if there's any type of cyberbullying going on, it continues until whenever you're,
Yeah.
if you're asleep and you have the phone right next to your nightstand and you're hearing ding, ding, ding at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, how can you really sleep? How can your mind really rest is what I want to say.
Right.
Because I know those wheels are turning like a hamster wheel, just going. But
And this
thinking-
is really where it's really important that parents get involved in helping manage the home and manage what's best for their child. There needs to be some tech-free zones.
Yeah.
And, I will say that my personal belief is that, especially for an adolescent, that the phone should not be the alarm clock. They need a different alarm clock. To me, as a way of protecting them and safeguarding not only their sleep, but lots of other things, their heart and everything else. That phone should be in the parents' room being charged at night. So like maybe there's a certain time that phone goes into the parent room. Maybe it's 9 or 9:30 at night. The phone goes into the parents' room to be charged. Don't put it in the kitchen. Come on. I mean, if you put it in the kitchen, you're just tempting your kid to get up at 12 o'clock when you're snoring and go in there and get the phone. And I mean, yes, in many cases, we can trust our kids. And even if they sneak and get their phone, that doesn't make them a bad kid at all.
Yeah.
But are you really serious about protecting them? If you're really serious about protecting them, put the phone in your room so that they're not tempted to get up and get that phone because they will do it.
And I think too, it gives your person, your young person, really ammunition to tell a friend, you know what, my mom takes up my phone at 8:39.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I can't be on it. So they have an excuse already that, they're not the bad guy. I'm not texting you because I don't want to.
Right.
I'm texting you because I can't.
Right.
So
I'm totally a believer in parents being the bad guys when it comes to all those kinds of things. When it comes to underage drinking, when it comes to, just blame me.
Yeah, yeah. So let's get into foundation number 3, which is attention fragmentation. And I was really surprised with this one because I didn't really think about like attention and kind of what social media or being online really does to our brains.
That's one of the reason I love this book is because there are a lot of ideas floating out there that we kind of maybe are thinking about, but there's a lot out there that he presents that we really hadn't thought about. And I think attention fragmentation is something real. That belief that you can multitask is just not accurate. Research shows we can't multitask.
Yeah.
So we're shifting from one thing to another, never being fully invested in one thing before we're shifting to another. And it's impacting our kids' ability to focus.
I like the connection that Jonathan Haidt made with the heavy use of being on social media or on the phone, that it's linked to weaker impulse control. And I guess it's because we can just click, 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 or scroll,
Right.
and we don't even think about it. We just do it.
Right.
So just that connection of, controlling ourselves later on, because, so I took down, when he talked about the variable ratio reinforcement schedule,
Right.
I thought, oh my gosh, that's how we train, animals.
Right.
And I thought, and we're the ones being trained right now.
We're the ones being trained, for sure.
Yeah.
And our kids are being trained. And that's why this book, the information in this book by Jonathan Haidt is, and by the way, we're not getting paid by Jonathan Haidt. Okay. No. It's just a great book. So we wanted to share this information, but that's, one reason this information is so important. For example, if we talk about the anxiety that some people experience when, for example, I can be with friends And I don't normally have my notifications on. I hate notifications. I don't want them on. But when I got a new phone, I didn't take care of everything. And so notification was on. And so my phone's over there, like maybe a little ding here, a little ding there. It's not bothering me. I'm like, but people in the room, oh my God, you would think it was a 911 going off, you know?
Yeah.
They're like, are you going to check that? Are you going to check? Not good. I'm good. But sometimes we can become really connected to those notifications. But there's an anxiety. Like I perceived people experiencing anxiety whenever there's a notification and they don't have the ability to pick that up and look at it. I mean, are you getting $1 million? What?
No, but I was going to say, think about it. You're grown. Mm-hmm. But when we're talking about an adolescent or a teenager and they don't have the experiences that we have as adults, right?
Right.
Or the control that we have. Mm-hmm. And so it's like a double impulse that they don't have.
Yeah.
You know, and just clicking and thinking, okay, who's texting me? And especially, you know, if their best friend is trying to tell them something. And now it's like, okay, when am I gonna, you know?
And even bigger than that, Anita, is I had the privilege, or I guess you could say privilege, I don't know, of living in a world that before smartphones, right?
Yeah.
And they have not just about, there's a generation now that has not. And how has that rewired their brain?
Yeah.
And social cues and everything else, right? But so I think that's really important is when parents, when we are struggling with our kid not, you know, complying or listening, it's not even just about like the kid choosing not to follow your instructions.
They can't.
There's been, and I don't want to use the word can't.
Well, what I'm going to say is they've been rewired.
Yeah. It's actually changed the brain. It's changed the body chemistry. The dopamine balance. And so we've got to be smart. As parents, we have to be smart when we're dealing with them and realize that, still have boundaries and all those kinds of things, but take that in consideration so that actually it'll give us some empathy.
Yeah.
And it will also cause us to be less reactionary and a little bit smarter in how we're approaching them when we're trying to rebuild some of these expectations that we have.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was number 3. So now let's move on to number 4, the foundations of harm. And we're talking about the addiction and the dopamine hijacking.
Yeah.
I really love this one because, you know, as we were talking about the rewiring and we don't even realize how we're being rewired.
Right.
Or what's happening. But, you know, one day we notice we can't live without our iPhones. You know, I know when TikTok was about to be gone, I was like, oh gosh, I hope it doesn't really happen. I hope that's a rumor because I'm on there all the time. You know, I'm hardly ever on Facebook anymore, really.
Right.
I am more on TikTok, right? I have kind of moved.
Never mind. Okay.
Yeah. So I have moved over there, but you know, so we're looking at, you know, addiction as like the slot machines, as, you know, as one of these where our brain is being rewired, you know?
Yes. So platforms are being built to cause us to stay on those platforms longer.
You know, it's like our brain, you know, we know that addiction lights up a part of our brain, right? And so when we're on a game or when we're getting all those likes, it's lighting up that same piece of the brain.
Exactly.
You know? Yep. And so in our survival, we have food at the top chain, water, you know, the basic things. But when we're rewired, guess what moves up there is our addiction to social media. You know, this is where we see pornography a lot. And I'll tell you that I've talked to more girls than boys with sexual addiction. And so I don't think that would, I mean, I don't know, but it's kind of like girls are
susceptible to it as
yes,
well.
yes. So it's not only a male thing that happens.
Right.
So we're seeing that with girls too.
Right. And, you know, we've mentioned dopamine, and that's a term we're familiar with, but I'm not sure if everybody is. So dopamine has to do with neurotransmitters, and it's also the hormones. And it's connected to that reward center. So it's connected to motivation.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. A little part of the brain.
One research that came out that Wall Street Journal published this, and showing that with Instagram, 1 in 3 girls experienced a decreased satisfaction with body image. So body image issues.
I would too.
1 in 3.
I would too, with all those filters. I mean, you look at all these pictures of perfection, and then you go to the mirror and you see yourself. You cannot compete. These our teens cannot compete. It's not real, first of all.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And you know, I think an important point is that this, you know, as a parent, when you begin to become aware of this information, you can just feel like you've just failed and you're failing, and it's not that easy. These issues are much more complex, and you didn't have the information. You did not know. And that's why this information getting out is so important, so that parents will have the data, will have the causations and associations with how social media, with how tech usage is impacting our kids, so that then we can make changes.
Too, I like that Jonathan Haidt's book has really like rallied around and made like a community of parents that weren't aware, or some that maybe were aware, but still they want to make a change.
Right.
Right. And so that's really,
you know, before we leave how girls are being impacted, I think we have to talk a little bit about, and you mentioned it briefly, but just about how girls are more subject to, what's the word?
Girls internalize.
Yeah.
You know, so if we're, you know, we are looking at these images and we're internalizing of we're ugly, who's going to want us? You know, so it's like, with girls, we internalize it, you know, so here we are getting anxious about our body, you know, we're getting depressed about how we look. To our boys, they externalize, you know, so we might see aggression with the boys, but, you know, they don't internalize as much as girls do.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. So the socialization and the relational keys are really important and foundational to girls. It's how we move in the world. We also, because of that same reason, are opened up to being exploited and being taken advantage of. And that's another key thing is we have to, you know, put some protections in for our kids. In terms of, you know, sexual exploitation. Girls are looking for so talking about, you know, social and relational, they're looking for those likes. They're looking for those follows.
Validation.
Yeah. And so, you know, a kid will have thousands of followers, and yet they don't even know that many people, right? But their friends are friends are friends are friends. And so they accept into their community, into their home, into their platform, people that they've never met. And not all of those people have good and well-meaning intentions. Yeah.
And so when we talk about like the health trends for girls in 2010 to 2020, you know, we see a reporting of like severe sadness and hopelessness, you know, nearly doubled.
Yeah.
So
hospitalizations for self-harm, for suicide ideation.
Yeah.
A tremendous increase in those.
Yeah. As I was talking about earlier about Instagram and all the how everything is, the pictures are so perfect when you're comparing yourself, you're thinking about that. Really, I love Snapchat. I love TikTok and Snapchat. Those are my two that I love. Snapchat I love because it's got fun filters. And two, if you're traveling, you can always like put your little map on, and but other people can see where you're at too if you have it on.
Right.
So be careful with that. But if you're traveling and you take a picture and you want a stamp of where you're at, it'll do a cool stamp for you. So I'm all about that because I'm like, where was this picture taken? Now I know, right?
Nice.
Yeah. But I mean, that can get like not addictive, but it can become a thing of like, okay, a normalcy, right? Of like, oh, if I'm taking my pictures, I'm going to do it through Snapchat because I have filters. I know where I'm at.
Right.
So, so with that, and then it also like you can change like your makeup on there. You can change, things. So
I think it was you that was telling me that even if you had a picture that you liked, but you weren't smiling, that there was an app that you could use that would give it the picture a smile.
Yeah.
So yeah. A couple of questions that I think are important for us to consider is how can we help girls develop resilience in a culture that rewards curated perfection?
Well, one, as a parent, I try to get in my daughter's world. I feel like it's so important to know, one, what she doesn't have social media because she's really young, but sometimes she gets in mine because if we, if I'm taking a picture, it's on, like I said, Snapchat, and so she's on there, and so she knows what the filter looks like. Sometimes she's a little doggy or a little rabbit or whatever, but I try to do like the fun ones so that she knows, okay, these are just for fun,
right?
Right. So letting them know, because you can't hide them because they're friends at school. My daughter and another daughter are the only ones that don't have an iPhone. And those other ones use the filters and they tell them about them. So they know about them, but it's kind of like, I want to get in her world, letting her know that, what, these are filters and they're made to be fun.
Yeah. So educating them, right?
Yeah.
Educating them of appropriate and inappropriate usage. And then,
well, also limiting, Jonathan Haidt says, delay social media until they're 16, which I plan to do. We'll see how that happens. But mine's already like, but we'll see.
Yeah. So taking some steps to educate, I think with boys and girls, this is an appropriate conversation where you let them know that if at any time they're on the internet or they're on a platform and they come across some type of information or images or anything like that that makes them feel uncomfortable, that you want them that they are probably that's probably gonna happen at some point. So you let them know that's probably gonna happen. It's not necessarily their fault, but that you want them to come talk to you if anything has made them feel uncomfortable, and then you'll help them, navigate that.
And that's a lot like we teach our kids safe touch, right?
Right.
It's just like that.
Yeah.
Except it's not in person. It's
right
on the outside or online, but still the eyes, you're still seeing this, so it's still an invasion of them.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
So teaching them that if anything makes you feel uncomfortable, and if we talk about this, from an appropriate early age, because they are exposed to it at an early age, then we've kind of given them a little bit of ability to get some help and not feel the feelings that they might feel.
Let's give them the verbiage.
Yeah.
Let them know that, okay, this has happened, and these are the words that you can use. Just like we do with our body parts when they're young. Right. It's the same thing. Right. It's just online.
Yeah. So what are we teaching our girls about who they are?
Well, that's really important. I think for girls, girls to me, because I can compare the two with my son and my daughter.
Yeah.
Like, girls are more Mine is a little bit more sensitive than my son was. So not that because she's a girl, but she's just more sensitive. But with that, I think there comes a lot of like inclusion, wanting to be included, wanting to be, part of the world. And so I think it's important to let her know that, you know what, if you're not included, it's okay that you're not. Giving her those resilient factors of, you know what, that's not the only friend. You go find another friend.
Right.
Right. Like if she was on the playground. If this kid doesn't want to play with you, then you go play with another kid.
I also think, just kind of exploring with them, there are times when maybe you just want one friend over. Maybe you've got 3 really close friends, but maybe there's a time when you just want to spend one-on-one time with someone. Does that necessarily have, negative repercussions about how you feel about the other person? Not necessarily.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
So helping them navigate those feelings of loneliness or feeling left out, FOMO, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I think some of the things too is maybe volunteering. We do a lot of crafts. We do a lot of pasta making. Just fun stuff that she's into. Again, getting into her world.
Right.
What are the things that are important to her? Animals are very important to her. So, maybe doing something volunteer with animals or things that she would like to do.
I think about boys. So let's say our little guy starts climbing a tree, and we're all about it. We're cheering him on, and we're like proud. Like, look at that little guy climb that tree. Our little girls start climbing the trees. What do we do? Oftentimes, not everybody.
Be careful, you're going to get hurt.
Yeah. What do? We start throwing out precautionaries, right? Just like you said, be careful. You're going to get hurt. Those kinds of things. So that is sending a message to our young ladies, to our girls, that they're not capable, that they're not strong, that they're not resilient,
Gosh, Annette, you know what that reminds me of? Especially too, if they have an anxiety.
Yeah.
And if we were to limit that,
right,
it doesn't give them the confidence to overcome that.
Exposure to, that
just,
they can tolerate.
Yeah, or even, going back to climbing the tree, being able to do something that a boy could do, being able to do something that she could do, right?
Powerful, strong, resilient.
Yeah. And so we're giving that confidence to them. Well, they're building that confidence within themselves.
Right.
But we're giving that opportunity.
Definitely.
So, yeah.
I'm, one of the things that we'll be talking about throughout our podcast is anxiety. And one of the things that our society is doing right now is every time there's a little bit of discomfort, some anxiousness, we're sometimes as parents, we're trying to alleviate that discomfort, that pain. So therefore, they're not being exposed to it, building a tolerance of it. And so these are really important things. I'm glad we're talking about them.
Yeah, I am too. So, so what is happening? We've talked about what is happening to our girls. What is happening to our boys? Gosh, I remember when my son was in the school. He's going to kill me when I share this.
Okay.
But every day when I would go pick him up, he had a ring of sweat around his neck from playing so hard because he was in the after-school program.
Awesome.
And so he had all that extra time to play, with friends. And I think about how now my daughter's in school and they only get 15 minutes of recess. 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, the world is changing, but it's not protecting our kids. It's not giving them those opportunities, So we have to make those opportunities for them.
Right.
There
are so many great things about technology. It's enhanced our world in so many ways. Advancements, in terms of cures for illnesses and all kinds of things. But when it comes to the developing brain, we just have to be smart about it. We have to be informed and we have to be smart. And some of the trends that we're seeing for guys is there's even an increase in those internalizing that we were talking about,
Yeah.
the anxiety, the depression, we're seeing an increase in that. We're seeing an increase in suicide. We know that guys have a higher rate of completion.
I was going to say that. I mean, I knew suicide was a high number,
Right.
but these guys are in their late teens, like 19,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
and completing suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And when I go think about it, I'm like, okay, so what could we do different to help these kids? You know?
Right. Right.
So, yeah.
And I think, part of that is going back to, the guys are using different platforms from the girls.
Mm-hmm.
They like competition.
YouTube.
Mm-hmm. So
Gaming.
so Reddit, YouTube, but also the gaming, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they are being exposed and participating more in pornography.
But I think just like the girls,
mm-hmm.
gaming. Jonathan Haidt, he had a quote about gaming isn't bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's, I forgot what he says, but basically it's, do you remember what he says?
Yeah, I remember he said that, well, for example, one thing is there was a study where if a person, a kid, used gaming for, say, twice a week, 30 minutes a day, they actually showed an increase in happiness and contentment. So it's not necessarily, it's the amount, and it's the result of the amount of time that they're spending. Because if I'm in my room and if I'm gaming, and even if I'm laughing and having a great time with my friends, if I'm doing that 6 to 8 hours a day,
you're missing opportunities.
What all am I missing?
A lot of opportunities.
So let's talk about some of those things, right?
Yeah.
We're missing face-to-face interaction. We've already talked about how sustaining the difference between interaction online and interaction in person, how one is sustaining and the other one's not.
Yeah. So I found the quote because I had written it down. So Jonathan Haidt says, video games aren't the problem. Only video games are. There you go. That's what I wanted to say.
Right.
And that's because of all those missed opportunities. And, if you're not having, if they're excused from not having family dinner and there's an opportunity to, for them to share during dinner time, but they're excused to go play games, and it's really hard to draw them back in, you know, so.
And really and truly, like when you mentioned that particular thing about be given permission to miss that family time, that's our connection, right? That's our relationship building. So we want to think about boundaries. And like we mentioned earlier, how certain spaces are off limits to tech. We want to build a home that really helps us connect, right?
Yeah. Jonathan Haidt also talks about the collapse of adult authority. And I say this a lot with friends. I know that maybe the boys are like maybe 6 feet, 5'8", but the brain is still not matured, but they're allowed to make adult decisions. Like they know what's better for them.
Right.
And so I think that has a lot to do with it too, just like giving them permission to be on the game instead of interacting with the family.
Right. Definitely.
And then I'm thinking, they're going to grow up, and what memories will they have? What family memories will they have? They'll be limited. So, yeah.
So our kids are spending, like we said, less time together in person. And we know that physical activity is really important for guys. We want to see them roughhousing and wrestling, in the house.
Yeah.
We want a few tables to get knocked over. That's a part of a healthy development for our guys.
Yeah.
I think, for example, about scouting. So my guy did participate in scouting, and I really thought about it a lot. I debated it a lot and chose to do that. And I am thankful that we did do that. Okay. But I'm mentioning this particular one because in scouting, when you're in scouting, it's a no tech zone. So you don't have your phone out, you don't have your technology out. So they typically will have, a meeting once a week, a couple hour meeting. And then once or twice a month, at least once a month, they're doing some type of usually nature activity. So they're gone for the weekend. Again, that's a whole couple of 2 nights typically in a day, that they're away from technology. They're out participating in nature. They're out participating in team building, bonding, leadership.
That's awesome.
They're being mentored. They have role models. And so that's just one example of something that we can begin to get back involved with is letting our kids scout. There are other activities too. Can you do some come to mind for you?
I was just talking to one kid and he said he was in Awanas, which is like a church program that's free. They meet on Wednesdays and he loves it.
So that makes me think of youth groups. That makes me think of synagogues. That makes me think of, so possibly maybe our churches, our youth groups, when they are there and they're eating and they're playing games and that sort of thing, maybe that's a no tech zone, maybe.
There's some really cool little cafes also that have it's not game night, but they have board games in there. Right. And you can go in there and play board games.
Right. Definitely. Trivia nights.
Yes. And when there's other families, I introduce myself to the other mothers or, to the parents that are there because I want my kid to see, hey, you can introduce yourself to this kid that's here.
Yeah. Meet somebody new. It's okay to meet somebody new.
Yeah. We're just playing a game here.
Right.
But it's all about the cueing.
Definitely. Right. Modeling. So you may have heard this acronym. It's NEET, NEET. And it means not educated, employed, or trained, right? So they're not currently being educated. They're not currently employed. They're not currently, being trained. And this is an acronym that's come out kind of self-ordained. And this group is actually pretty proud, that they're in this category, right? Yeah. Oftentimes. And it's speaking to how our adolescent and young adult men are fitting into that category. And I just think about, the isolation of that. The lack of motivation that influences.
And it's sad because they're young adult men. They're not, teens, but this is I guess the consequence or the causation of always playing games, losing those, because
losing those real world connections, right?
Yeah, because if you don't have those, if you don't have the basics, let's just call them the basics. How can you even have confidence in yourself? And so we've seen a drop of 40%, or we've seen a drop of 10% in the past 40 years for our young men attending college. And that means even trade schools,
right?
And so when we look at that, it's not just because maybe lack of confidence, but also there's research showing that they are behind on testing and their scores are lower than that of girls.
Yeah. And I want to go back because if I'm not careful, I will even detect a tone in myself where it seems irritated, even talking about it, right? Where it seems judgmental. And I don't want to feel that way. And I don't want to, have that kind of attitude because just like we mentioned earlier, this is more complex. This is getting back to how, our brains have been trained, what it has done to actually wiring and body chemistry. So, yes, we need to be informed. We need to take action. We need to set up healthy guidelines for our kids and boundaries. And at the same time, if those haven't been in place, and now we go and start, beginning to put those in place, which we want to,
Yeah.
It's very important that we do that, but there's going to have to be some understanding and empathy as we make that transition.
Yes. They need a lot of, I'm not going to say hand holding, but guidance,
Right.
A hands off guidance, because they have to be able to take those risks. We give them opportunities and now they're willing to take them.
Right.
So,
we talked maybe just barely about this, about how algorithms are built to keep us involved, to keep us scrolling, to keep us gaming. And, guys like more, what is the word? Kind of exciting type. For example, they love a good prank. They love to see somebody, shoot a basket after they've jumped off of, a skateboard, all kinds of things, right? So they like that excitement, that fast pace, a little bit more aggressive type nature of things. And some of the algorithms, they start with, a funny, and it just begins to build to a prank, more aggressive, more extreme. Same thing as far as like, political rhetoric, those kinds of things. And so but unless we teach our kids, unless we, teach our boys that that's what's happening, they're not going to know it. And so one important thing is to take off kind of the auto feed, and make it where you're searching.
Yeah.
Because the auto feed, for example, I was talking to somebody about this the other day about how, you pick up and you go to a social media platform or whatever, and there's a cat that had a weird eye. And so you stay on that cat with the weird eye for a couple of seconds longer. And then the next thing you know, all you're getting is cat stuff. And
don't send me any cat stuff because I am not a cat person.
But same thing, with every other topic, right? And so our kids need to know that, well, as parents, we probably need to take off that auto feed and help our kids know how to do that as well.
Yeah. Well, and again, we're talking about impulse, and where something might pop up and they didn't look for it. It could be pornography. And then they just click because of impulse, like, okay, let me watch this. And, it just continues. And then, then we've got problems. So.
Yeah. And so again, just with the mention of pornography, again, is, this is not your grandfather's, Playboy magazine, right? This is some serious stuff out there, some dark stuff out there. And just like with, the things that we've mentioned, the escalation, same thing happens with pornography. It can happen.
Yeah.
Not that it always happens, of course, but it can happen. And we're talking really young brains.
Getting rewired.
Yeah. And it's important to have those conversations about how what you see, let's say you have an inexperienced male or female, right? We need to have the conversations that what you're seeing is not real world. That is not what sex is like in the real world, right?
Yeah.
But we need to have those conversations. We need to have conversations with our young men about how typically in pornography, the woman is not esteemed.
Right. Yeah, I wasn't talking about sexism, but you got there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go on.
Well, because, once they start seeing it might be humorous at first.
Right.
Like you said, it starts building, and pretty soon they're kind of in the middle of kind of going dark and they don't even realize it.
Right.
Because it's funny.
Yeah.
Well, it started out as funny.
It can be a lot of things. It could be funny. It could be interesting. It can be curious. I might not have any, background knowledge. So I don't know about you, but when it was time for me to kind of find out a little bit about sex, guess what I did? I went to the library, okay? And I was not a geek, okay? And when I say that word geek, I hate labels, okay? So I wish I hadn't even said it. But I was not someone who was always in a book, okay?
So then you right away, something's wrong. Something's wrong. She's in the library.
But I had great parents, but I wasn't comfortable, I guess, going and asking explicit details of my parents about how does this work, right? And so I went to the library and found some interesting books, some that I would open and go, okay, not that book, but and begin to educate myself, right? So we do need to provide some education. I know, for example, at the church that I go to, they do say, I believe it's 6th grade, 5th, 6th grade. They do, I believe the course was called God in Me. And it was a course that taught a lot of great things about our bodies, about relationships, about sex. And so there were conversations that happened in our house. There were also conversations that happened in our place of worship, which I think is really important. Yeah. But I will tell you, in hindsight, I wish I had gone into much more detail. I wish I had elaborated on that much more. And so, yeah.
All it does is give our kids verbiage. It helps them to ask questions. It helps them to start understanding, okay, what is it that I'm talking about?
And it takes the taboo off, right?
Yes.
One of the things that we did in my family early on is on Sunday nights at dinner, we would have like discussion topics. It might be on boat safety. It might be on, all these different topics. But I tried to have all these kind of benign subjects or topics so that I could work in some of these, more really important topics. But if they were just one of many topics, then hopefully it would take the uncomfortableness. In our family, we talk about all kinds of things. Yeah. And this week's topic is A. Next week's topic is B. Yeah. So it kind of make it more commonplace to have discussion. And we want to have those discussions.
That's good because it normalizes, okay, I can come and ask mom.
Right. That's the goal, right?
Yeah, because that's what we want to do. So, so we've talked about the how all of this is affecting boys, and you talked about the church, and so we talk about the spiritual elevation and degradation that happens. Do you want to talk about that?
So actually, I'm kind of thinking I was still stuck on pornography for a second. Let me go back to that.
Okay.
And I'm trying to think about this spiritual, elevation.
Yeah.
But
when I read this, I immediately thought about stillness and connection, with like nature. I thought about meditation, prayer,
right.
And just having the moment, because a lot of the time we miss it because not only are we on social media, but we're always moving constantly.
Right.
Like we are always late, we're always rushed, hurried. And so just taking the time to just, rest. That's what I thought about when.
That is so important because when you feel that sense of awe is in those quiet times. Okay. Yeah. Same thing with creativity. There are stories about some of the greats, some of the great inventors that they would have their insights as they were drifting off to sleep, or taking beginning to take a nap or something like that, about the point where their pen would drop because they were going to go to sleep. They would be in tune to have a creative moment and insight. And so, we need that stillness, don't we?
Yeah, we do. And it gives us focus. I feel like that is part of the focusing, when someone speaks, making sure we understand before we respond.
Mm.
You know, just the norms that we grew up, our generation grew up with. I
Right.
feel like are not the norms of today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
And I just want to put this out there because we work with young people all the time. And I mean, it's the joy of my life.
oh yeah,
It's the joy of my life. And we have such great kids. I get asked this all the time by people who aren't, in industries where they're working with kids all the time. And they're like, how do you do it? These are great kids.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
These are great kids.
With questions.
Yeah.
Because they don't know how to navigate.
Right. And so I feel like sometimes when we're sharing this information and when we're sharing some of the things that are happening as a result of where we're at as a society with technology, that it almost sounds like we're putting down this generation. And I don't feel that at all.
No.
I feel like these kids are awesome. I feel like they're rocking the world. I love spending time with them. I love hearing the things that they're doing. But yet at the same time, we can't deny the statistics, right? The statistics, the data is out there to show that they're being harmed. And so because we love them, because we believe in their greatness, we want to get involved and see, are there any changes that we need to make in our own personal lives? Are there any changes we need to make in our families? Are there any changes we need to make in our communities? Are there any changes that we need to make in our societies? And when you look at the data, it's not just the United States.
It's globally.
It's global. So let's wake up, let's look, and then let's really work to do what's in the best interest of our kids and our society.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing I really liked about this book is that, like I said, it builds a community of, if you go on Instagram, you see a community of followers with Jonathan Haidt, giving great ideas, but two, there's a lot of videos out on TikTok about parents that are, offering those opportunities to those kids. And that gives me hope, because it's not all about just the teens that, that we deal with,
right?
But it's also giving them hope, helping them navigate, and helping the parents navigate as well.
And I want to go back and express, I know we've done this in previous episodes, but I want to go back and express empathy for the parents and what they're going through in this time. Oftentimes as parents, we are doing our very best, but we're operating with the information that we have, the understanding that we have,
right?
The skills that we have. And so I just want to encourage parents you used a term that I really haven't used so much with outside of my home, but you talked about co-parenting, not just with your spouse, but with other parents.
Yeah.
And so I want to encourage parents to do some co-parenting with their best friends, with people in their church, with people in their synagogue, with people in their community. Get with those people and you guys unite and come up with some general guidelines that, everybody can be on board with.
Yeah. I am so glad that my daughter has her friend that doesn't have an iPhone, that also has a flip phone.
Okay.
Yeah. And so she's not singled out because there's somebody else, her friend.
Right.
And so now they're the powerful two that have the flip. So
there you go. And that's
community.
That's even, earlier you mentioned like one tip or guideline possibly for helping to make changes to delay that entry into social media until a minimum of 16.
Yeah.
You mentioned a flip phone.
Yeah, that's
awesome. Another strategy, right?
Another strategy that I use is she doesn't have she doesn't have any social media. She could, but she doesn't. And everything that she does is on my account.
Okay.
Like she doesn't look at Facebook. She doesn't look at, but if she wants to, if we want to look at TikTok together, we'll sit down and we'll watch TikTok together. Right. That's basically the one that we watch because we watch a lot of crafts on there.
And, I was thinking about Jonathan Haidt's book. in the back, he has a list of resources, everything from apps, all different kinds of resources that parents could utilize to help monitor, to help manage. And that's definitely worth, checking out. We can explore that.
Yeah, we can do that later on.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
All right. Well, as always, good to talk with you, Anita. And we're always so thankful for you being a part. If you are liking any of the information that you're getting, please subscribe. We've got a goal of getting 1,000 subscribers in the first month. And I'm just putting that out there. I want to reach it. So we really want to encourage you to subscribe and tell your friends. Yeah, definitely. So as you go about your day today, own your wellness.
Elevate your life.
The content presented in this episode or any others should not be considered therapy and is not prescriptive. If you have questions or concerns about mental health, contact your primary care physician or local mental health provider. The opinions expressed are solely ours and are not representative of our employers or coworkers.